Hi everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Luke, and I am part of Turner and Townsend. And we're joined today by Jack and Olivia, who work for Building Energy Experts, and they will be providing a short presentation. And this is provided by the Retrofit Information Support and Expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and delivered by Turner and Townsend. And then I will now hand over to Jack and Olivia to kick off our presentation. So thank you.
Brilliant. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jack Allen, Managing Director of Building Energy Experts, and I'm here to talk about technical preparation for Warm Homes Wave 3. Today, we'll be covering the following topics: introduction to Building Energy Experts and us, lessons learned from technical surveys and understanding their role in grant-funded schemes, insights into PAS 2035 and the lessons we've learned, a look at retrofit measures and the lessons from previous waves, and some tips for delivery based on our experiences. First off, a little bit about us. I started my career in commercial decarbonisation, producing sustainability reports for commercial property. I then moved into sustainability consultancy, where I became a BREEAM AP, specialising in large mixed-use developments. This experience led me to gain sort of a deep understanding of the performance gap and a desire to help solve this. So when I formed Building Energy Experts, I wanted to have a real focus on testing and real world performance, as well as existing buildings. Because it's become clear that the new builds are only going to be a small part of the puzzle in reaching net zero. And the real challenge in decarbonising our stock and reaching net zero as a country was in our existing buildings, especially our homes. Bit about the company. We're an award-winning sustainability consulting, testing and retrofit company. We're based in Bristol, but we work sort of nationwide for house builders, property developers, architects, councils and other built environment stakeholders. Our mission is to bridge the performance gap in energy efficiency at every stage of a building's life cycle, from initial planning to construction, testing and retrofit. How do we do that? We offer a range of services. And firstly, we're testing specialists, offering services such as air testing, ventilation, thermography, borescope inspections. And we come from the position that without high quality data of what's in a building, it's impossible to accurately model and design buildings and apply the correct measures. So you see that as key. We also offer retrofit consultancy, from stock analysis and archetyping to coordination and design, and as well as our more traditional previous side, which is sustainability and energy consultancy, often helping new build, but also existing properties, covering everything from planning with energy modelling and overheating. And consequently, overheating is something which I think should be brought up in a retrofit arena more often. Quite often, if you're doing, particularly if you're doing external wall insulation and you've got scaffolding up, why not assess the overheating risk? Quite often, the most vulnerable people are in social housing. It's predicted that 4,500 people will die from overheating by 2050. So when we've got it up, when we're changing facades, why not consider a bit of shading to at-risk properties? And finally, we offer commercial decarbonisation services, including PAS 2038, which is kind of the PAS 2035 for commercial buildings, which is actually kind of a more robust scheme in many ways. And we provide reports and improvement option evaluation for non-domestic properties. So surveys and technicals lessons learned. Successful retrofit projects hinge on gathering high quality information right from the start. Poor quality retrofit assessments and technical surveys lead to delays, inaccurate designs, and ultimately fewer installed measures. For this wave, assessments now need to meet the retrofit standard BS 40104 as well, which requires a lot more data to be collected. It's crucial that your assessors are gathering the necessary information needed, as standard softwares by the compliance bodies don't ensure compliance, even if they're lodged with them. So you can't just rely on that. And non-compliant RAs may need result in needing to be revisited or redone, causing delays to the coordination design phase and ultimately the whole project. Right, so let's talk about some of the challenges we see with retrofit assessment. Firstly, tenant engagement and booking is one of the most critical elements of a successful program. Quite often tenants have no idea who we are or what we're doing, despite letters being sent out, because they're sent out too late. The letters aren't informative enough. There's been no tenant engagement event run. And when projects are run like this, we see very high cancellation rates and low booking rates, which leads to delays, high property dropout, and not being able to target the most appropriate properties for the funding, and that causes problems throughout the whole program. Poor quality assessments are also a persistent issue. Often assessors don't collect enough data to accurately model energy use or create effective designs. This results in additional site visits and project delays and increased costs. Assessments are quite often just conducted by subcontractors. There's no quality assurance, so you don't know what you're going to get, and you open up one from one street and it's vastly different quality to the next, because the barrier to entry for retrofit assessors is relatively low, and the training courses vary significantly from very good to pretty poor. And you can be in any old non-property related job one day, and 2 weeks later you can be out on the road assessing buildings, or some assessors have sort of 20 years of building surveying experience and provide incredibly detailed assessments. So when you are picking, if you are directly awarding the assessments to people, checking their qualifications, experience, examples of previous work, and not always going for the lowest price option is one of the key elements to making sure the assessments go well. Another critical element is timing. When assessments are left too late, the entire project timeline becomes compressed. And this leaves no room to develop cohesive strategy that effectively connects the assessment, testing, coordination, design, and delivery together to ensure the project's successful. So don't wait for funding to arrive, be proactive. You don't have to get them all done straight away, because you obviously be a bit worried about getting the funding back, but definitely identify your archetypes and assess them and start developing overarching strategies now. And make sure as well with the BS 40104 compliance that the assessors are aware of it, who you've got coming in to do it, and that they're going to be collecting that additional data because it's needed to be collected. To address these challenges, well, 2 years ago now, we developed our own app in 2023, which is sort of flexible based on projects, so we can change the different data points required, and it produces our own sort of bespoke report, which we lodge via Elmhurst or other bodies. But this focus on quality earned us Retrofit Assessor of the Year in 2023. So I'm just going to show you some examples of that. So in terms of collecting extra data, this is an example of a window schedule, rather than just sort of numbers of windows, actually marking the windows with an individual identifier, which room they're in, their width, their height, the area, the glazing type, the frame type, the orientation, trickle vents, condition, and whether it's open or not for purge ventilation. If you gather all of that information, then it easily gives the coordinator and modeler the information they need to progress that design and do that more detailed energy model, because it's not often that it's just remaining in RDSAP, because it's a bit of a blunt tool. And again, this is for radiator data. Gathering radiator data is required, but a lot of people aren't used to it. It's really important to have if you're going to be speccing a heat pump, because you need to know the output of those radiators. Because if you can just switch a heat pump out for a traditional gas system and keep the plumbing system, then brilliant. It's not going to be that expensive. But if you have to switch the whole plumbing system, it's going to be a lot more costly. So making sure those radiators are identified, which room they're in, their size, single, double, so the output can be predicted for the heat pump design. Furthermore, floor plans, when they're sort of scribbled and poor quality, it's really hard to coordinate design and energy model from. So they should be clear, ideally to scale, or if not, just like really clear. And they should identify the elements like the individual windows, where their location is, the radiator location, the different lighting, etc. We also like to provide 3D models to our clients, or to our coordinators if they're doing the modeling, because there's no sort of replicate for being in site and have experienced the building. So if somebody's identified all the different building envelope types like this, it makes modeling way quicker, way easier. You get way less questions back from coordinators or modelers. So on to air tightness testing, which is one of our sort of specialities. One of the frustrations of air tightness testing in the previous waves is that it's just sort of been blanketly applied, often because they've fallen into the old pathways of Pathway C, because it's over 30 projects, and none of the measures which are being installed are actually air tightness applicable. So it's kind of a waste of it's a waste of money, really, because those tests just get done. Those certificates never really get looked at. They're just simply lodged with Trustmark for a tick box exercise. But when done properly, it's one of the most effective tools. And the good news is, in wave 3, there won't be the pathways, and the blanket air testing requirement has been removed. So it's now only necessary if your measures affect the air tightness, so you're changing something in the fabric, or if you're setting an air tightness reduction target. Developing an air tightness strategy is now a requirement for everything, but that doesn't mean you have to test it, which I think is a sensible change. This should result in fewer pointless tests and the more effective use of air tightness data. As sort of an industry standard, pulse testing has kind of become an industry standard, and a lot of people seem to think that it's superior to blower door, which isn't true. Pulse testing is a great new technology, and it's really good, but its main benefits are it's less intrusive, and it's quicker, and it's easier to perform, so you can be in and out. It's not more accurate, although it is fairly accurate, but blower door is still far superior in terms of like what your total outputs, because it's a far superior diagnostic tool. So you'll be depressurizing the house, and you can either use your hand, or you can use, like in this photo, a smoke machine, or we use thermal imaging as well to identify where all the air leaks are. And if you're using blower door, it enables you to produce detailed air tightness reports. If you just receive a certificate and you're a designer, you're like, great, it's got a really bad air tightness score, but I've got no idea where it's leaking. So if you're using the blower door depressurizing, and the tester is trained, they can go around using a range of techniques to find out where those problems are, identify them with an image, mark it with red lines around there, and have a description of it, and what the best solution to that is. Part F ventilation testing is possibly one of the least understood and enforced building regulations. It's been a requirement for 15 years now, but people are only just sort of starting to work out what it is. It's a requirement of PAS 2035. It's a BS 40104 requirement, and it's a building regulations requirement if you're doing any major works to a building that will affect the ventilation. Very few assessors are testing flow rates, and those who do often lack proper training or calibrated equipment. The correct assessment requires someone with a competent person, ideally with the domestic ventilation competency training, with a calibrated anemometer or flow, or with the flow hood on, or a calibrated bolometer, which is that equipment in that photo there. Furthermore, if you are assessing the Part F, quite often it seems people are just testing and getting the flow rates, whereas a true Part F ventilation assessment goes beyond that. It's not just a simple visual check or a test of the fans. It requires flow rate measurement, but also measurement of trickle vents, door undercuts, and verification of purge ventilation to ensure the whole building is compliant. This is an example of just an extract from the Part F section of our reports, just showing the targets of the flow rate, whether the ventilation is present, shows if there's purge ventilation, the system types, if it's DMEV or just a simple extract system, your undercut size, etc. Next, thermal imaging. Thermal imaging can be done very badly. It's often because it's put on a tender process and people want to go to the lowest score, so they're just putting in like 100 quid for a thermal imaging survey with a iPhone attachment, done at the wrong time of day, to a very low with very low resolution. These reports aren't particularly useful. They're not often done by anyone with any training. They're not tuning the photos to make sure they're all done to the same scale. And poor thermography reports end up in people taking the wrong conclusions from them, which is counterproductive essentially. So accurate results require qualified thermographers with high definition cameras, and to do it in the correct conditions as well, which is there needs to be a 10-degree temperature differential, so it needs to be sort of within the winter months from October to April is sort of the maximum of the window. Commissioning them in the summer or spring is kind of a waste of time. With high definition thermography as well, you can also use a technique called thermal indexing, where you take the internal temperature, external temperature, the temperature of the surfaces, and you can use it to calculate to show all of the areas which will have a condensation risk because they're at a lower, they're below the dew point where condensation will form on them, and therefore you can predict where condensation will form and black mold before they do. Here are a few examples of some thermal images. The first one here is a solid masonry wall, followed by a bit of a slanted roof going onto into the flat cold roof above. It's not a flat roof; it's got a vault above it. But you can see that the flat roof at the top has been insulated with loft wool, so is appearing warm. The next sort of turquoise band is an uninsulated sloped roof, which is just going straight to the outside, followed by those purple squares split by stud work. That's the triangle above the soffit, where there's a ventilated space without any insulation in. And then it moves down into the green, which is the solid wall. And then you can see an uninsulated single glazed window performing particularly badly because they're often one of the worst bits of building fabric. And to the right, you can see there's a slither of the party wall. You can see the party wall's actually performing much better. It's obviously got the heat from the next door dwelling. In the middle is just an example of one of our retrofit report, one of our thermography reports. There needs to be a high definition image, all tuned to the same scale, so you don't take the wrong assessments with the environmental data taken and observations on each one. If a thermographer has made an observation, you know that if there was a bit of like sunlight on it because it wasn't done at the right time for any reason or anything, they can that it shouldn't be done, shouldn't be there, but they can put it there. And so you don't start thinking that a wall's insulation has failed when it hasn't. And thirdly, on the right, there's a window, and this shows the advantage of high definition because around the edge you can see it's very sort of fuzzy, and that's clearly an air leak as opposed to a conduction heat loss element. So it's the high definition enables you to differentiate between air leaks and general heat loss. Finally, boroscopes. They're a really important tool. Challenges with flats or drilling locations sometimes. If it's a mortar and you might be concerned there's some pipe work or wires behind it. But other than that, if it can be done, it should always be done for cavity wall properties with the retrofit assessment, because it really just sort of it speeds up the whole timing of the process. Because if it comes back as a retrofit assessment with a cavity wall assumed unfilled, then cavity is going to be a really cost-effective and easy measure to install in the fabric first hierarchy. So you're going to just be sending someone back out, so it's just going to delay the whole process. To make cavity wall reports useful, quite often you just get a bunch of images in a folder which don't tell you where they're from or anything about them. they need to be put into a clear report showing exactly where the drill holes are, and the different elevations, the type of wall, the cavity thickness, and also labeling the individual images to matching them to which elevation they were taken from. This means that they don't have to go straight back, because what usually happens is delivery partners just see a bunch of photos and go, right, we need to go straight back and do a proper cavity wall inspection, because we're not really sure where any of these match up to. Right, now we're going to cover a bit about surveys in a grant funded scheme. Understanding grant funding, essentially the retrofit assessments can be covered in either box, the administration auxiliary, or the capital costs, which enables you to be more flexible and essentially invest in high quality RAs to start projects off on the right foot. Also do new EPCs in the ANA. EPCs are quite often incorrect because there's been like a loft insulation scheme or a window scheme that hasn't been documented since the initial data used for the application for the grant. So you get there and it's a low C or a high D. It doesn't really make sense putting it into the scheme. And then in terms of the capital costs, then the air testing, ventilation, SAP, and the other PAS costs, assessor and coordination costs go into that as well. Right. Now we're going to do a quick overview of some lessons learned from previous waves from a PAS perspective. Essentially, we're in this scheme, the compliance and for the funding, the compliance with PAS ensures quality and ensures that you get the funding, but sometimes they can prove inflexible and tricky to navigate and frustrating, especially for the delivery partners. So it's best to have an overall strategy and make sure you stick to it. Ensuring compliance to PAS at every step reduces project risks and improves outcomes. It's essentially a set of guidelines on how to effectively project manage and deliver a retrofit project whilst reducing risk and obviously improving the energy performance of each home. Training and expertise are key. Skilled coordinators are key to navigating compliance and managing risks. They're also the retrofit project managers and the sort of the linchpin in terms of joining together all the elements, making sure the assessors get the right information for them to coordinate, making sure the designers have a clear coordination package so they know what they need to deliver, and making sure everybody understands the kind of evidence they need to bring in. Without that clear communication and a decent coordinator, projects will really struggle. Continuous improvement as well. Make sure feedback from previous projects is learned from. Another sort of in terms of continuous improvement, there's also a requirement in the next wave for post installation monitoring plan. It doesn't mean you have to put monitoring systems in, but you do have to have a plan as to how you're going to do it, and that can be gathering data from the occupants, just monitoring a few of the archetypes, but creating that plan and gathering that data is key, and it should improve the whole process going forward. Where do projects go wrong? I think data quality is probably one of the main issues. Good strategies are built on good data. EPCs aren't reliable, especially if they're out of date, not out of date 10 years, like a few years old even. And you should try and know your source as well. When you ever commission an EPC scheme, get people not just to provide you with an EPC, but get them to send you the XML, get them to send you the photographs as well. Pay someone to go to site, might as well just sort of get that evidence and bank it, because when it comes to doing an archetyping assessment or anything, if you've got that evidence, then it's going to be so much quicker and easier. And also, yeah, just there are quite a few sort of softwares which people sort of push to do the bid funding and stuff, but softwares can never see inside a house. They don't know what's in it, they don't know what the measures are, so they can be useful for quickly analyzing it and making really sort of broad assumptions, but it's going to change a lot through the process. Assessment quality, been that over that quite a lot, but yeah, poor quality requires more visits. Appropriate, accurate testing speeds up the process and helps optimize the design. So just make sure that all flows correctly and the right measures are specified. And also tenant engagement, when they're engaged, everything goes better and they're more willing to book in, more willing for everything. But building trust is key in starting early with that. And also another sort of key factor in where projects go right or wrong is the proactive clients who prepare data and strategies earlier have smoother projects, whereas reactive clients who rush at the last minute often compromise results. We've got some clients who have started in the last few months already their RAs for this scheme, even though the funding hasn't been released, just in anticipation, doing the archetypes and creating their plans so they can, and lining up their delivery partners so they know they're ahead of the game. How to avoid the issues. Success starts with collaboration. So making sure everybody works together. We went over that earlier a bit. Good quality assessments from the assessment point of view, starting early and running pilot projects. Get you off on the right foot. From a coordination perspective, giving the assessors that clear brief on what they need to provide, undertaking thorough analysis of the data, and taking a holistic approach to create a clear plan for designers and delivery partners. And from a certification point of view, which is obviously key to receiving the funding, make sure everybody is clear of the direction and their requirements, and quality assurance is maintained from the whole throughout the whole project. Make sure every team member knows what's expected of them and the evidence they're required to provide. There's no point in asking a delivery partner for in construction photos once they've finished. If they haven't received them, then they're not going to see it. They quite often won't read emails as well. So it's just really, really key to make sure they've confirmed they know what they need to provide. But on to retrofit measures. Delivering the right measure for each home is essential. Every home's different because a different person lives in it, even if it is essentially looks the same from a fabric perspective. Also, stuff has happened over time, and so what works in one home might not work so well in another. You need to make sure that the measures are verified by the coordinators and designers to make sure they're being done properly, and that the occupants understand what the measures are that are being installed, how to use them, and what the benefits are, and what the unintended consequences are. One of the examples of that is like turning off MVHRs or blocking DMEV systems because they think they're either making their house colder or that they're using too much energy. Another key thing with measures from a PAS perspective is balancing the occupant benefits with cost effectiveness. If you're choosing the wrong properties and putting in lots of high Ds and low Cs, there's no point in going through PAS if you're just going to put a few low energy light bulbs and a little bit of loft roll in, because it's going to cost you sort of £1,000 to £2,000 per property to run through the whole PAS process, and it's a great process to ensure quality. But if you're just doing that, you then have to make sure that they're PAS 2030 installers. So there's going to be a cost involved with that. And just to put in a couple of simple measures, I'd say you're probably better off just running separate loft and light bulb replacement schemes for those projects if it's whilst the funding requirements are only to get it just above a C. So in terms of retrofit measures and what actually usually comes through, floor insulation almost never happens because of the disruption and technical complications. External wall insulation can be great for solid wall properties, particularly when you have to follow fabric first. It's a lot more costly than other measures. Internal wall insulation is tricky and hardly ever works, but a time to consider that is when a property might be void. If a property is not, because say for conservation reasons or aesthetic reasons, not applicable for external wall insulation, identifying the stock which could be applicable for internal wall insulation and getting that work done as it becomes void is a really good overarching strategy. Cavity wall insulation is usually a good cost-effective measure as long as it's done properly and it's appropriate. Loft insulation, great as part of an overall scheme. As mentioned, if you're just doing loft, possibly not worth it in the PAS scheme of things. Other fabric measures, windows and doors. This can be quite frustrating if they're spec'd when the windows and doors are only like 9 years old, and you have a window and door cycle which is every 20 years. You don't want to see windows which are still working quite well be ripped out for a marginally better performance, which will probably get ripped out again in 10 years because the amount of embodied carbon involved in those is huge. So although they can make a big difference and it's really good, especially if they're leaking a lot of air, that don't automatically get rid of windows and doors because it can be expensive from its benefit. Air tightness and draft proofing is often really beneficial. It's not very cost. It doesn't cost a lot, and the new RD SAP is going to allow us to put air tightness in. There'll be more benefit when that comes through. A quick one on ventilation. Mechanical extract ventilation, which is decentralized mechanical extract ventilation, that's always on in the bathrooms, and MVHR are allowed. PIV is not supported by Part F and should not be put into dwellings. It pushes warm conditioned air through the building fabric and causes interstitial damp. And if you put a PIV in and you do a Part F compliance test, it will fail. So don't put them in. And DMVHRs, decentralized MVHRs, are only compliant with Part F if they are part of an overall larger MVHR system and they're just servicing one room that can't be serviced by the MVHR. You can't have a DMVHR as your overarching ventilation strategy. In terms of heating and moving away from fabric is low carbon heating. They still want heat pumps and heat networks, but it's a bit more flexible in this scheme. Air-to-air heat pumps are allowed, which would be more applicable to things like flats, and also flats or places which don't have any external space would be good. Solid biomass unlikely, heat batteries unlikely, and high retention storage heaters are still one of the measures, but low down on the hierarchy. Other measures to look at are heating controls, PV. Other renewables are typically unlikely. Batteries, although they're not often very cost effective. They're very expensive to install for the benefit they deliver. And low energy lights are a measure which makes a difference. But again, when going through the PAS process, is it worth doing it for just a few light bulbs? And there are other technologies as well, such as AirX blocks. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on. Retrofit measures lessons learned. Essentially, thorough site visits and communication and resident engagement are crucial at the beginning, and consistent communication through the project. And communication based, keeping tenants involved in the process, ensuring they're on board with all measures, even if they're hesitant at first. Resident engagement is important in understanding the scheme's intended outcomes. If you can run events and show tenants if there's a property nearby that's being retrofitted, the benefits, and get them to speak to other residents so they really trust and get bought in, then it's always going to be a lot more successful. Also, another thing on ventilation, just make sure ventilation is considered at every stage, because it is one of the key complaints and problems with black mold and condensation coming through. And also it's one of the horror stories often projected in the news about any sort of eco measure causes black mold everywhere, where it doesn't, if the ventilation is correct. Right, in terms of measures, it's always going to be a balance of energy efficiency, cost, practicality, and thermal comfort. It's about finding the sweet spot where you maximize the energy savings without breaking the bank, while also considering how these measures affect the comfort and usability of the building. Get independent advice if you're using a turnkey solution. Use a critical friend to assess the measures value for money. Some people just aren't used to new measures, even if they are really good, so they'll be hesitant about it. But they can always be informed and helped with it, as long as there's good designers and coordinators. Is it always fabric first? Well, fabric first is a requirement of PAS, where practical and affordable. But there are plenty of great value non-fabric measures that provide much quicker returns and have lower embodied carbon to install. So they should always be considered as well. And value for money, the focus obviously needs to be on reducing the amount of energy used and reducing bills. Often fabric measures sort of get lower, some much higher returns, and also be innovative and pragmatic. Good coordinators and designers have an in-depth knowledge of all the appropriate measures and be able to predict and specify the right measures to make the most difference and make sure they're also providing good value for money in terms of the cost of measures, the cost of the scheme, and getting those delivered. On the right, it's just a new system that I saw recently, which is an internal only air source heat pump, which I thought could be a really useful technology, especially in flats and properties with limited external space. So now we're going to go through a few delivery tips. Focus on communication, timelines, and managing client expectations. Engage professionals and delivery partners as early as possible, because they're going to get booked up, especially as soon as the funding comes out. They get booked up really quickly, and you'll end up paying more for less experienced people. So really engaging with them and getting their understanding your stock, engaging with them and letting them know what you want to achieve early, and getting them booked in is key, and making sure there's ongoing dialogue with all stakeholders, that this minimizes the disruption. Delivery partners can often get a really bad rep, and some of them don't do a great job, but a lot of them are really trying hard. And if they don't have a really clear plan, they don't have a brief, and they're getting that information really late, it is a really hard thing to coordinate. They're coordinating a lot of people to come together in a single week to deliver measures usually, without disturbing people whilst they live there, because residents are pretty much always staying. And from a resident's perspective, the works can be really disruptive. So just make sure they really they understand as much as possible the benefits that these are bringing to them, and that this really is a scheme to help them, not inconvenience their lives. And the last element is sort of providing realistic timelines, making sure the tenants, everybody knows how long it's actually going to take, planning for delays, because ultimately some things will come up, and there's always going to be a deadline to get all those things in and all that evidence in and get the works completed, because there always is with funding. Just a quick note on SAP 10, because I've been asked quite a lot recently. People are hesitant about starting before it's supposed to go live in April. It's actually fine to go on with SAP 2012, the current version, RD SAP 2012, until the go live date of SAP 2010. Any EPC lodged in the current version will still be able to be lodged in that version for the purposes of PAS. And if no EPC is lodged, then they'll just accept an EPR report, and you can still produce the EPC SAP in the new RD SAP, but it's not going to affect the PAS process or your funding. Right, now for a few closing thoughts. Do a thorough analysis of your stock and don't rely on old EPC data. Understanding your building stock and align retrofit with stock upgrade schemes where possible to maximize value. Undertake pilot retrofit assessments and testing on archetypes to produce overarching retrofit strategies and understand the likely measures as early as possible. And make sure you store that data, keep the XMLs, so that whoever's done it means you can still engage with different consultants, different assessors as capacity allows, and they can just take off from where the last people left off, essentially, and get to grips with the testing methods and their benefits. Commission the most useful ones for the desired intended outcomes, and save those tests against the properties file somewhere, so you don't end up having to redo them pointlessly if you've already paid for it. And SAP 10 doesn't restrict assessments from being done now. And then more from a delivery perspective, get independent advice to understand the measures available and the value they deliver financially from a health and well-being perspective. Get contractors lined up so you have capacity to deliver the measures that are planned. There is vastly less contractor capacity than the amount of measures that are going to be funded. So really make sure they're on side. Maximizing the funding by understanding your building stock and targeting the most appropriate properties to maximize the funding benefits and not letting them drop out. And engaging with residents early is crucial to ensure smooth project rollout. Don't wait for the funding to be awarded, and set realistic timelines. that's all from me. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jack. That was really insightful.